London was jittery this morning. Amid a climate of increased threat levels and new anti-terrorism measures, this hoax tweet emerged last night. Commuters were warned not to take the tube. It resonated, even though it wasn't true, playing on people's fears. The threat from British jihadis is sinking in.
In the early days of the coalition, Liberal Democrats and Conservatives forged common cause in protecting civil liberties. Since then, they have drifted apart. And over the weekend, Liberal Democrats voiced concerns that David Cameron today might go too far. Even one Conservative cabinet minister was concerned the Prime Minister might be too draconian.
To confront the threat of Islamist extremism, we need a tough, intelligent, patient and comprehensive approach to defeat the terrorist threat at its source.
He started with the areas of agreement. Legislation to give the border police temporary powers to take passports away from UK citizens planning to leave to fight jihad. Airlines will also be required by law to cooperate with the intelligence agencies on who's flying where. But everything else was harder. On plans to exclude suspected British terrorists from returning to the UK, David Cameron was only able to say he would work up proposals and put them to cross-party talks. And indeed, in another area, there was something of a U-turn. The coalition shelved the Labour Party's control orders when they came to power. Today, to raucous laughter by the opposition, the coalition had to agree they would be looking at bringing back control orders, in all but name.
So we will introduce new powers to add to our existing terrorism prevention and investigation measures, including stronger locational constraints on suspects under T-pins, either through enhanced use of exclusion zones or through relocation powers.
David Cameron's position on civil liberties has changed somewhat over the years. When he became leader, it was against Tony Blair and his tough law and order government. David Cameron sensed an opening, and it was the Tories that pledged to protect civil liberties in this country. Even though, as a young man, he worked for Michael Howard's Home Office, hardly noted for its lenient law and order agenda. When David Cameron became leader of the Conservatives, it was he that pledged to protect civil liberties, part of an agenda to woo over metropolitan liberal Britain. That agenda has now been seriously downplayed. This is the then leader of the opposition in 2009. So here is the next stage in our radical redistribution of power, stopping the state from exerting too much power over us by enhancing personal freedom. So you will not be followed or have your home entered for no good reason. You will be tried by your peers, protected from unjust prosecution abroad, and your identity will be freed from the chains of state databases.
Now today, I want to focus my remarks on terrorism.
This speech at Munich in 2011 was a turning point. Less than 1 year of being in office had hardened David Cameron. Here he said multiculturalism had failed and Islamism was a bigger threat than people thought. From this time, the coalition partners started to go their separate ways on civil liberties.
When a white person holds objectionable views, racist views for instance, we rightly condemn them. But when equally unacceptable views or practices come from someone who isn't white, we've been too cautious, frankly even fearful, to stand up to them.
Tonight it's unclear what elements of the Prime Minister's package, apart from passport seizures and airline cooperation, will see the light of day. David Cameron was beaten back by Lib Dem opposition and legal concerns. Not a great first day back at Parliament.
There are serious question marks next to at least two of the major policy announcements that were being talked about there. The idea that returning jihadists can have their passports removed, questions of legality. I believe those questions being raised by lawyers within government. They were raised in the House of Commons by the man who was Attorney General until very recently, Dominic Grieve, and the Lib Dems are very seized of them, and they also have questions as to whether it would be operationally useful to go down that route. The other thing that the Lib Dems are very much on the case of is they don't want to see something that could be described, as Simon was saying, people are ready to describe it there, as a return to control orders. Control orders were scaled back to be called something T-PIMS in a horrible acronym, and the Lib Dems don't want to go down the route that David Cameron was flashing at people in that statement, where you could have, what you used to have under control orders, an internal exile in effect. You relocate someone, say from the East End of London to Cornwall. They don't want to go down that route. They'll take a lot of persuading. We may get something a bit less than that. at an expansion of exclusion zones, which exist under TPIMs, sorry for this jargon, and for instance might stop someone who lives in the East End going to a particular community hall or something like that where they're believed to have caused trouble in the past.
And amid all these challenges home and abroad, how is Mr. Cameron himself dealing with all this?
Well, he hopes he's getting the judgment right in terms of specifically these counter-terror measures. The rhetoric was inevitably stepped up last Friday when the threat level was stepped up, but he's very conscious that Tony Blair came up with some sweeping powers 12-point plan after the seven killings, and much of that 12-point plan was blown away under legal challenge and practical challenge as well. He's hoping that he's done something more modest, sensible, that meets the purpose. As I say, there's still a lot of work to be done on whether he can get all this stuff actually in place.
Well, Gary mentioned the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, and I spoke to him just before we came on air and asked him, how far can the Prime Minister really go? Dominic Grieve, these people that have gone out to ISIS have declared themselves for another state. Isn't the Prime Minister right? Actually, they should just stay there?
It's not a state we recognise, and the difficulty is that as long as they are British subjects, they have a right to come into the United Kingdom. Of course, on coming in, they could be arrested immediately and should be put on trial for their misdeeds if they have committed them. But it isn't possible for us under international law, and the Prime Minister accepts this, to deprive people of their British nationality if they have no other nationality. And in addition to that, it's unprecedented to prevent a United Kingdom national from entering his own country. So whilst I look forward to seeing what the ideas are that the Prime Minister may be working up with his colleagues, I think there is a very real difficulty in practice about doing this.
Now, on the control orders, that is a U-turn, isn't it?
I'm pragmatic. On the whole, we shouldn't have control orders, and ideally we shouldn't have TPIMs. Control orders are not without their difficulty. They're a fetter on a person's liberty when they're unconvicted, and they can be challenged. But David Anderson, who is the reviewer of terrorism, has suggested that more powers can be added to the current regime, and I certainly think that that's possible, and it ought to be possible to do it and to withstand legal challenge.